Right, so good evening again, everybody. That was a fantastic set of presentations. Certainly, I have really learned a lot and really enjoyed hearing from all of our speakers tonight. So what we're going to do now is, between Gabby and I, we're going to just ask each of our speakers one question, while you have a chance as an audience to think about the questions that you would like to put to them. And you can start to begin to put those into the chat, and we can ask questions, or put your hands up and we can ask questions of our speakers from the audience once we've moved through these first questions. So we're going to do one question for each speaker. We're going to ask them to just answer the question quite quickly in about a minute, and then we'll come to our audience for their questions. So first of all, Sam, back to you. So at Eden Project Cornwall, you work with a lot of children and a lot of young people, but often for very short amounts of time. How do you find ways to look at these very big and difficult issues in that context?
Thanks, Jo. I think there's a couple of things I want to pick up on about this, really. One is about just engagement and how do you engage? And partly that's down to the skill of my team, is that they are very, very good at reading the room and talking to the young people where they are. I briefly mentioned the idea of kind of the power of narrative and story in our education programmes. And we find that a really powerful tool for engagement. And that might be a daft made up story about the what ifs in the example that I gave, but also using the Eden Project, for example, with older students to structure learning, for example, in an enterprise challenge. What would be, how would you design and produce a product for the Eden shop? So when I'm talking about stories, I'm not just talking about kind of made up stories for little children. I'm talking about narrative as a tool to engage. And what we find is that can give us, as well as the hook in, it can also organise the learning in that short amount of time, because your story, your yarn, also defines for the learners how they're going to find their way through that and how they'll know they've been successful at the end of it. So that's a really key thing of how we land learning in that short amount of time. And the other thing, just to briefly mention, is where we start, and we don't start with the bad news. That you know, Eden Project's overall approach to interpretation and engagement is that we always start with connection. We start with awe and wonder. We start with amazing stories about the natural world, and lead from the heart. And yes, we have to engage with the issues and the scary stuff as well, but that's not where you start. And it's also not where you end, because where you end is with examples and ways that other people are addressing and engaging with these issues, and how your learners can respond to and take action with these issues in their own lives as well. So you kind of complete that arc even within the really short time period available.
Thanks very much.
Rob, wanted to ask you a bit about what's the aspiration for the Morecambe Bay Curriculum?
Thanks, Gabby. Hi, folks, again. So I think the first thing to say probably is that we are aspirational. We're positive and we're excited and curious about the future and about the planet that we're living on. And I think that's a really important position to take. I would say that also through over the last 2 or 3 years, what we have established is a really resilient community of practice right around the Bay. We've got practitioners and teachers and colleagues from across education, the health, the business, community environment sector, collaborating and working on this single mission to create this curriculum. And that's a really unique situation that we've been able to construct. It has taken 2 years or so. It's still in its infancy, but it's driving towards a 25-year blueprint with 5-year milestones and 1-year priorities, where we try to align the activities and aspirations and resources and capacities of each of those sectors into this single mission and purpose of having a curriculum that will deliver sustainable futures for where we're living. I think the other thing to say is that this sustainable model is one that will be informed by research and lead to sustainable lifestyle change around the Bay, and that's one of our major aspirations. Also to share and learn from other people, not just locally, but nationally and internationally, and bring that thinking, research and experience and expertise into our own context. And I think probably finally for me is to say something about us thinking globally, that all our projects have a global perspective, but they're happening locally. So we've got concrete examples of sustainable research, sustainable projects that are making a difference to our everyday lives and the Bay as an ecosystem in itself. And then that's what we've put ourselves on the line as professionals and with our community to say that we can think out of the box, we can be disruptive, and we can do things that we haven't ordinarily thought about before. So this is a challenging thing that we're taking on. We're drawing upon all sorts of different thinking and different ideas from all sorts of different disciplines from around the world, from different practice, different projects. But I think what we're creating is an organic, ground up, which you've heard earlier, ground up model of practice, which is really trying to make that difference. And it has to be sustainable. It has to be something that's lived and breathed and felt by everybody that's living around the Bay and make that difference. So I think probably to close is to say that we are aspirational, we're being brave, we're challenging, you know, the established practice, conventions, wisdoms, policy frameworks that exist in our area, and we're trying to, you know, raise our heads above the parapet and recognise there is a planetary emergency, and we need to do something today to influence tomorrow, and we're taking that challenge on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think you sneaked a whole extra little talk in there, but we'll forgive you because it was very good. So, Linda, how can you ensure that the process is inclusive for all children?
Thank you for asking this question. Naturally, it's a question that is asked often, and quite rightly so. We need to be mindful of it all of the time. And I'm thinking the Eden Bear pilot that we ran, and there was a research base to it. And it was one of the things that came out of the research was to be mindful that actually by running a project like that, you could actually increase the differences and the disparity between different children within different communities around the Bay. You know, so we must ask ourselves that question all of the time. How do we make sure that it is inclusive? How do we make sure that we are closing those gaps rather than, you know, if we're not mindful of it, in fact, widening them? And again, like I was in a meeting, a strategy meeting around the Morecambe Bay Curriculum recently with health professionals. Again, that was the question that was asked because of the disparity in this area in health within the communities. So one of the things that I would say with that is that we're mindful of it, so therefore we are going to approach it in the right way and make sure that we include people. And some of the projects will absolutely do that. Through schools and pupil voice within schools, of course, they are inclusive places. It is a universal offer that we give to children. But even still with that, we make sure that if we are running projects like where the Wildings projects we've included very different social communities within there, and also we've got a special school that's within there, and nursery and secondary, so that we've got the cross ages as well as tarmac schools and leafy schools, you know, so we're thinking about that all of the time. And also I think as well in some of the projects, you know, I say that schools are universal, it's a universal offer, but we have to be mindful that some children aren't in schools. You know, some of our most vulnerable children aren't in schools. So there are specific projects which are looking at the gaining those young people's voice, designed for those children specifically. Okay. Thank you.
Brilliant. Just keeping the answers nice and short for now. We're going to go over to Jason. Wanted to ask you, what are some of the cultural challenges in international nature-based education, would you say?
An example that is very illustrative of it is when our team was cooperating, our team in Cornwall was cooperating with the team in Qingdao on performances that will occur when Qingdao opens in 2023. The project is based around water quality, the importance of water, what it means culturally. And we were working with a group there who were also working on narrative and and performance. And we reached this impasse where Sue Hill, who's our head of performance, and Sam Smith, who's head of the creative team, had this in the story, in the narrative, they had a child hero. And this was really irritating the other side. And they were getting very het up about this. Why does it have to be this young girl who's the hero? And our team went, oh, they're against a young girl. They're against girls. They don't like that, do they? And that wasn't it at all. And we had to take on board the fact that we have a tradition of, like, the emperor's new clothes, of a young person, and your lovely 10-year-old whose quote you read out at the beginning of this talk, sort of, we can really appreciate that we equate innocence with a sort of wisdom. But also from their side, they would equate innocence also, and they're not wrong, with inexperience. So the emperor's new clothes, in our version of it, it's like the young child goes, no, the emperor has no clothes, and then the emperor gets embarrassed and runs away. In their context, they'd say, keep your mouth shut. I know he doesn't have any clothes either, but I don't want us to get in trouble. So there is this aspect of it. You have in Steven Spielberg's E.T., Elliot saves E.T. and keeps him from the government and the grown-ups. So the compromise was, we had an old grandpa with the young girl, and they are now the thing that represents rounded wisdom and knowledge combined with innocence. It's all very Blakean, as the two heroes going forward.
Brilliant, bringing that intergenerational context back there again. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. I know my 13-year-old certainly thinks he's got more wisdom than me or most other people at the moment. So I can see the challenges. Right, moving on to Liz. What is the vision for the activities you described in respect to climate change?
So one of the aims is to increase children's awareness of their local environments as habitats for plants, birds and other creatures. And as their naturalist skills increase, they become better equipped to notice indicators of climate change, such as the arrival of new species or the decline of others. And it's about building an intimate relationship with place and care for a place. And so by building ongoing connections to local places, children will be better placed to get involved in decision making, for example, about land use changes or flood risk planning. So the aim is that the projects reinforce one another and seed new activities that are driven by children. So, for example, understanding habitats and plant needs can help children to design food growing projects that work with changing environmental conditions and available resources. So in terms of scale, the projects are shaped to make global climate challenges relatable to local places, to increase opportunities for action, and also to connect with other people globally.
Brilliant, thank you. And last but certainly not least, Alison, I was going to ask you a bit about how educators in Cumbria are responding to the sort of aspirations of the Morecambe Bay Curriculum.
Thanks, Gabriella. That's a really great question, because Cumbria is a very interesting place. The first thing to say about Cumbria is just how much passion and excitement and commitment there is in the community of schools for the Morecambe Bay Curriculum. And I think that comes because Cumbria is that sort of place. I mean, we're now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. We're at the edge of a national park. It naturally attracts people who like to be in the outdoors and love and believe in nature-based learning. And those people are in our schools already, which is just fantastic. The difficulty is talking about the Morecambe Bay Curriculum, because they don't see themselves as part of Morecambe Bay. They see themselves as the South Lakes or the Furness Peninsula, and they look north and inwards. And getting them to turn around and face that marine environment, it has been, well, a series of interesting discussions, let's say. Wonderful, because suddenly, you know, they're thinking about that marine environment as well, and it's a really sort of liberating and empowering thing for them. I can talk about a couple of incredible projects actually that got off the ground very, very quickly because they were kind of ready to go. And this is what I'm saying about this bubbling up of passion and interest in Cumbria. Down in Barratt, the Pupil Referral Unit have a wellness wood, which is an established, and they're working with a primary school, and it's a completely holistic part of their curriculum offer, which is really exciting. The Kendall schools are collaborating with the local authority and United Utilities to create an education park alongside the River Kent, a couple of kilometres of riverbank that will become a 25-year project for children and young adults in the community in Kendall. So you can see the scale and the scope of the vision there. We decided on 4 projects, and perhaps if I just run quickly through those 4 projects, it'll give you a feel for how Cumbria is just a slightly different place in some ways to North Lancashire. The first project is the one that we've got in common, which is the storytelling project, and people are busy going out finding stories about agricultural communities, village life, and communities right across the bay. So that's what we've got in common. And then the second project, again, we've got in common, which is what's growing in our grounds. So people are either looking at horticulture, but interestingly, linking with, you know, rosetted restaurants like L'Enclume to look at foraging and growing and fine dining, which is an interesting link. So there's the economy of Cumbria there as well, very specific to our context. But they're also interested in the wildlife as well. But then the other 2 projects are very specific to us. One is around agriculture. We have lots of children growing up in farming communities, and we know that their future is to be stewards of the land. That's not the easiest of sells. There's a range of approaches to agriculture, from, you know, James Rebanks and his English pastoral to people who want to do it the old way and don't understand why they need to change. So that's a challenge for us. And then the 4th project is called Living in the Lakes, and this is for children who live in tourist destinations, but don't actually go much further than the end of the road they live in and aren't on the fells and in the lakes or, you know, down at the beach, because that's not their place. They're disconnected. So really, really interesting and really rather different challenges for Cumbria. The good news is, my goodness, the passion and excitement in the schools is palpable, as I'm sure Rob would attest if he was asked. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have put a question to every one of our speakers, and we'd like to thank you again for our speakers for answering all those questions. And now we will open to the audience, and so we welcome questions from the audience.